Hi, this is Tom DeWeese, President of the American Policy Center, and I want to welcome you to number 10 of our webinars on training on how to fight back on the local level, how to build that freedom pod in your own community. And today, I have a very, very special program because what we're going to talk about now, maybe you've heard the efforts to put together what's called a 30 by 30, which is a land grab of massive proportions. They are admitting they want to lock away about 30% of all the land and water in the country and lock it away from human use. Actually, they want much more than that, but this is a major part of what they're doing to us step by step by step. And luckily, we have with us today Margaret Byfield, who is the executive director of American Stewards of Liberty, working out of Texas, and they are the leaders in fighting to stop the 30 by 30. And today, I'm going to have Margaret tell you a little bit about what 30-30 is and what they're doing to fight back on the local level, on the state levels. They're having some success on this, and I think we can all learn a lot from what they're doing. So Margaret, welcome to joining us in number 10 here of our webinars.
Thank you, Tom, and it's great to see you again. It's been a lot of years.
It has been. We have some history. We fought together for many, many years. And yes. As I said a couple minutes ago to you off screen here, is I've been singing your praises because you were the guys who stood up and stopped the Trans-Texas corridor several years ago, and it hasn't raised its ugly head again yet, has it?
No, it has not. The only way that they can get that put in now is piece by piece, which is the way it should be done, because then the locals can decide if they want that project or not. So absolutely, yeah, that was a big battle to win. It was a really good success for the property rights movement.
Absolutely. Well, let's get some more. And okay. Can you start just kind of explain what 30 by 30 is, how they're putting it in place, what this whole deal is with this?
Okay, let me give you just a little background how it came on our radar. And it came on our radar after Biden was elected. So, as you know, as we've worked in the past, we really study the environmental movement pretty closely. We watch them closely. So we really keyed into what were they talking about? What were they focused on? Because we knew that the radical environmental policies were going to really have their foothold in the Biden administration. And so one of the things that kept coming on our radar was this 30 by 30. So we started really drilling into it to learn what it was, drilled into it enough to know that it definitely was going to become a centerpiece of the Biden administration. So let me give you in just a quick summary elevator speech what 30 by 30 is. 30 by 30 is a very radical environmental agenda to permanently protect 30% of our lands and oceans by 2030, which is now basically 8 years. We're coming into just 8 years. That's a lot of land. We're talking about approximately about 700 million acres that they want to permanently protect with no human use. And I mean, this is big. This is really, we say it is the largest unauthorized federal land grab we have ever had to face. But that in a nutshell is what it is. Now, it's being sold to the American people as this is just a program to conserve working lands and to help stave off the climate crisis that we are in and to keep species from going to extinct. But the bottom line about 30 by 30 is it is about control. And as you will know, because we've had these conversations in the past, we have to remember how Karl Marx defines socialism. And that's the abolishment of private property. And 30 by 30 is that tool. It's that first step in that major tool.
Yeah. And this, when you talk about locking away 30% of the land, you're talking about valuable farmland that provides our food. You're talking about any kind of use of private property that somebody might want to use for themselves, something they've purchased and they own. And the water as well is part of that. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, it's land and oceans. So they also want, we do have friends in this fight, and they're the fishermen, because they're talking about locking up 30% of that. But there's some really interesting things. We can kind of dive into the details a little bit on 30 by 30. I think it's really important for your audience. You have a great audience. They're very well educated I don't feel like I can go too deep when I'm talking to you. They will get this. But so one of the key pieces that we really looked at was a report put out by the Center for American Progress. It's called How Much Nature Should America Keep? Now that's the report that all the environmental groups kind of teed back to. And in that report, there's some very, very important things that we're told from their perspective. And that is, number one, they believe, based on climate science modeling, which is very inaccurate, but they believe that over 1 million species will go extinct in the coming decade. So that's kind of the basis for this whole program. They believe that we are losing a football field of habitat every 30 seconds to development, okay? So, and then there's a couple other things. They point out that the areas that have to be protected are of high biodiversity and in productive use. So again, they're targeting lands that we productively use. The other thing that they say is that currently only 12% of our lands are currently permanently protected in its natural state, the state that they are seeking for the 30%. So, you know, when we look at what makes up that 12%, because that kind of gives us an idea of what they're seeking, right? It's the wilderness areas. So those are the lands, of course, you know, that it has absolutely no management. If a fire starts, they let it burn. So it's the areas become monocultures. That's how come we have so many fires in the West, is because of that kind of management. National parks are another one that are in that 12%, and state parks. And importantly, especially to the Eastern audiences, because they haven't really got engaged on 30 by 30 yet. But importantly, it's included in that 12% are conservation easements in perpetuity. So those conservation easements on private lands that permanently protect the land forever are considered by these proponents to be as well protected as wilderness and our national parks. That should scare private landowners.
And when they talk about, you know, all this, these species going extinct and all, and how much we're losing, all that, is there any scientific basis for any of that they can prove?
No.
Any of this is true? Yeah, of course not.
No, it is one huge guess. I mean, all this climate crisis narrative is built on climate models. And we have seen so much evidence of these models, recent evidence of these models being highly inaccurate. I mean, true scientists don't rely on models. They use models to maybe help them decide what they should study, or, you know, it's like but they don't use it for conclusions, like to base a scientific conclusion on, except the climate crisis crowd does. And that's what they're doing. So, you know, that's why you have scientists such as like Stephen Conan, who came out with that great book called Unsettled, who is Obama's one of his top science advisors and was in the Obama administration. And he came out with his book at the first of the year called Unsettled, which if you really want to dive into the problems with the climate science, that's a great book to do it. He's not of our persuasion. He's probably not nearly, I don't know that he's conservative at all, so I know he's not my persuasion, but his focus is on scientific integrity, and that's what really has bothered him about the way the climate crisis science has been proposed. But that's a great one if you really want to understand the science behind it. And to answer your question, no, there is no science.
Yeah. And then you mentioned in one of your publications, the Scientific American article where they admitted 30% up to 70% that they want to lock away.
Yeah, that was really interesting. So, you know, back to the days in the 1990s when the Biodiversity Treaty was going through, they had in there a 17% threshold that they wanted to permanently protect. So 30 by 30, the concept has been around for a while. It was back then it was 17%. Now, because we're in year 2030, obviously the ringing, you know, PR campaign is 30 by 30. So now they're up to 30%. So what they did in France this last month was at the IUCN Congress that they hold with all the nations, they put forward this resolution for 30 by 30 to make it official. Because first off, this is an international agenda, you know that. It is, I tell audiences that I speak to that, we all understand that Biden did not come up with this himself. This is an
Or anything
international
else.
agenda. And so it's been pushed on all the countries, but they wanted to make it official. And so they did the official 30 by 30 resolution here last March. What's really interesting about that resolution is that they say 30% is the minimum. And we've been talking about the half Earth philosophy because that's another big push. We've been saying very clearly that 30% is only the first bite. They're going for the half Earth, 50%. But in this new resolution, they say that it needs to be up to 70%. So, they just keep upping the ante, and we need to get really smart about it and really get serious about fighting this.
Yeah, and here's an important thing as we talk about fighting it. As they say, really 70%. What we're really talking about here, when you start looking at all of the programs that they put in place, the smart growth programs in the cities and the development programs there, that moving everybody into the cities off the rural areas where everybody is living there in those high rises, no transportation, and they can control our energy use, they can control our food supply, everything else together with that. This is how it all fits together. They want everybody off that rural land where people live independently, can keep themselves going without government, all into the cities where they're dependent on government. So this is another piece of that puzzle. And when your city councilman, your county commissioners are sitting there and they're talking about a development plan to put these smart growth programs together, and this is how step by step at the local level they are putting this in place. So.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because when you look at how they're implementing 30 by 30, so first off, we have to back up and realize it's not authorized. So Biden, puts this in on January 27th, the Climate Crisis Executive Order 14008, but he doesn't cite any authorization for it. And the president himself cannot unilaterally determine that we are now, as a country, going to set aside 30% of our land. He doesn't have that authority. So first off, this is all unauthorized. So how they are implementing it is through existing programs. And watching them do this is very interesting. We're seeing a couple of trends that you will recognize that fit right into what you were talking about. Number one, we're seeing wildlife corridors becoming a big talking point and a big piece of the 30 by 30 umbrella, because that's how they begin the process of moving people off of lands in order to create corridors for the wildlife. And so, and if you've been following anything on the southern border, then you will have heard the cry from the environmentalists that we need to take down the Trump wall because it's blocking the wildlife from freely crossing that border. So wildlife corridors are coming up big. And the other thing that we have to really watch is what the Department of Agriculture is doing to our food service. So to the rallying cry from Secretary Vilsack has been, we have all these great conservation programs for landowners. And all we want to do through 30 by 30 is to help landowners do a better job at conserving and producing our food. So that's kind of the narrative that they're laying out. But what are they doing? They are paid, they have increased the dollar per acreage that they are paying landowners to set aside land and put it into conservation status, meaning don't use it under the Conservation Reserve Program. So the acreage has gone up significantly that they're paying. And we've already seen instances where there have been landowners making a decision that instead of leasing their land to their neighboring rancher, who is a working rancher producing our food, they instead take those conservation dollars because it's a lot more money than what the working rancher can pay. So now what we've created is what they are creating, I should say, is a scenario where our federal government is competing with our working landowners who are growing our food with our tax money. They're outpricing us, and they're making it impossible for landowners to make a living because unless you are under one of their conservation programs. So we're seeing it, they're creating a scenario where the only way you can make money in agriculture is if you sign up for one of their conservation programs. And then that leads into them telling you what you can grow, when you can grow it, and having control over all of those decisions. So that's where we're starting to really see the socialization of our food system. And that, that's another component of losing our property rights. But that's a really important component for people to understand, is that if you really watch how socialism gets into other countries, controlling the food system is one of the key things that they also have to do in the beginning. And that's what they're doing under the 30 by 30 umbrella.
Yeah. All right. Well, you are having some success in pushing back on this. Can you tell us some of the many, I think there's probably more than one way that you're doing this, and how you're getting people to understand this and stand up and fight back, and what's happening with that?
Well, the first thing we did is we reached out to a county that we worked a lot with over the years, Garfield County, Colorado. In other words, we read it on January 27th in the executive order, and the next day we were on the phone with Garfield County, and they're just this great county, great group of commissioners. They get these issues, they're always up to speed. And so they authorized us to hire an attorney that we worked very closely with, Norm James, to develop an opposition resolutions that counties could adopt to oppose 30 by 30, and put all the appropriate legal language into that. So, and then Garfield County passed that first one on February 16th. So that was 3 short weeks. We had that up. At the same time, we also had produced the first version of the Guide to Fight 30 by 30, which is about a 12 page guide, but it goes through all the Q&A of questions on 30 by 30. It really gives you a really good background. So you can digest the issue quickly and know how to argue against it and what it is. And so that guide has been really, really important, because, when 30 by 30 was slipped into the climate crisis executive order, that's a 57-page executive order. There's 2 paragraphs devoted to 30 by 30. And all it really says is that we should conserve 30% of our lands and oceans. And so unless you were clued into what 30 by 30 was, you would have missed it. And so a lot of people missed it. So we really have spent this first year just getting people educated on what 30 by 30 is. And so that's why that guide has been so important. It's free. You can download it online. We have updated it with our 5th version now, so we keep it fresh with the new information that is going out there. That's one key thing. You can download it, spread it as far and wide as you want to get people educated. And along with
Margaret,
that download,
give us your website and where they can download it from.
Okay, so it's americanstewards.us, and there'll be a little. We have a storm clouds picture with 30 by 30 that has become pretty recognizable for that campaign, and you can click on that and you'll get to all of that. Included with that, you will get the model resolution to oppose 30 by 30, which you can then take to your county, and it's in a Word file, so you can edit it and put in the things that are appropriate to you, make the changes that you want, make it your own. But it has the real good core legal language that's good to have. So we started that. We started getting the model resolution out, and as counties were hearing about it, they started passing the resolution. Now, a resolution is just an expression of will, right? So you sometimes have a resistance to that. Well, what does it really do? The really important thing about that resolution is that the message that the Biden administration has been giving in order to sell this program to the American people is they've been saying it's locally driven and it's volunteer. So they're trying to tell people that this is a local idea when it's an international idea. So the other thing is that there is a pretty good ground game that the legal conservation voters had already had in place before the start of this year. They had a letter circulating through Congress signed by 450 local elected officials supporting 30 by 30, calling for this agenda. Now, what's interesting is that those were individual locally elected officials. So 1 commissioner on a board of 5, which really has no power, right? So that's why we thought, no, what we need to do is show that the governing bodies, those bodies that have planning authority in these areas, they oppose this. And so that's why the local government resolution is so important. The other thing that it does is when you work on getting that implemented in your town, in your home front, then what you're doing is you're educating a whole new group of people on this idea. And as you educate and you get 5 commissioners or supervisors to vote to oppose this, you have also created a whole constituency that understands that and is ready to fight. It's a galvanizing tool. It's a very good way to get your community organized. The aggregate of that is that I think we're now up to about 100 counties across the nation that have passed this. And that looks pretty good on the map, you know,
That's
where it
passed
shows
your resolution. That's
yes, that have passed a resolution to oppose it. And here's what kind of happened in the press. So these resolutions started getting out there, and as people downloaded it, got the resolution, they just went to work. I mean, so many of these counties that have done this, we haven't ever even talked to directly. They just took our material and they knew what to do. They went out and they got the fight going and they got it passed. And so these news reports started, you know, coming out in the local papers that the county just passed an opposition resolution to 30 by 30. And then that started generating some regional news. And then it started making some national news, the way it trickles up. Well, the campaign was already going in full swing before the environmentalists really realized that they had opposition.
excellent.
And that was the key to really getting out in front of it. And so as a result, the first thing that the opposition had to do was, you will see that starting in, and we labeled it in our first guide, this is a land grab. And the Secretary Vilsack in April started coming out. He was the only person in the administration coming out starting to defend 30 by 30. And every time he tried to defend 30 by 30, he had to explain why, you know, this isn't a land grab, and he had to say land grab. And Fox News actually did a story on it in May and interviewed myself and interviewed a fisherman and interviewed the National Geographic environmentalist who explained to the audience how we must conserve 50% of our lands. But Fox News actually did a really great story on this, and they titled it Land Grab. But that was really important. So we got that labeling out there. So then what you had happen was the administration was supposed to release the report in 90 days after the executive order of how they were going to implement 30 by 30. So we thought, great, we'll finally get some details on what this is going to be. Well, of course, their report was very detail light, no substance, none that really could add up to 30% of the land of how they were going to do it. But what they did do was they rebranded the campaign. We were no longer to call this 30 by 30. Now it's called America the Beautiful. So they had to do this whole PR marketing campaign to try to basically redirect what they were doing and try to sell to the American people that this was really just a fuzzy, warm, we're just out to conserve and restore lands.
That's what they always do. Whenever
yes.
we get on top of them and start to win the battle, they change the name, come at it from a different direction and say, oh, this isn't that, this is this. And you know, that's where we have got to have, as I've been advocating, we get that permanent infrastructure in our communities on how to fight back. And you've got your researchers and you've got your agitators, the people who are going to go out and speak out on it, to be ready to switch directions like that every time, just as fast as they do, and be right in front of them again. And that's what we have to do, keep on top of them. Yeah,
you know, and that's exactly right. And that's really the message we've been pushing too, is that and we've gone to, I think we've been in 20 different communities this year where we give a full presentation on 30 by 30 and educate the audience. And the message we leave them with is that you are the only one who can protect your home front. I mean, we can go in, we can help you understand the program. We can show you how they're trying to implement it in your community through specific vehicles. But at the end of the day, we go home, you know, and we can keep you updated through our reports. But at the end of the day, they're the only ones, the people on the ground are the only ones who can protect their home front. And so that's part of what we try to do, is just try to keep them as fully educated as possible so that they know what to watch for. And then of course, be a resource to them as well when things happen and they can ask us questions. Should we be concerned about this or not? And keep that connection going to help them on the ground. But ultimately, they're the ones who are going to have to stand up and fight it. And as you have been saying, if each area protects their home front, we can stop this stuff. We really can stop this stuff. So it's absolutely the right strategy.
Great. And one of the things that we found and I know this fits in this as well, when you can show people that they are going to be the victims of the program, that's one way to begin to recruit more people to your efforts, that this is how it's going to directly hurt you. And you're talking about locking away the farmland and the open space and so forth, people's homes there, their livelihood. In fact, you can show everybody in town, they're going to cut off your food supply. So
Yeah.
everybody's a victim of it. But those are some of the things that we've been talking about, what you have to do to get people rallied around these things, that they are personally going to be victimized by it. So.
Yeah, you can ask the question, which 30% of your land do you want to give to this program? Do you want to give to Biden? Do you trust Biden to manage? Because that's what you're asking.
Excellent.
And I think the other thing to point out, which is just to kind of follow up on that point, and something that we point out pretty regularly, is who is it that's behind these, that are promoting these land grabs? They're not the people that have the land.
Of course,
they don't own the land. They're trying to push this whole agenda on people, and they don't even have a dog in the fight as far as owning any of the property that they're wanting to control. So that's a big part of it. I will tell you though, one of the other things that has been really good in this fight is there were two things that we were able to do quickly, and that was, as we were getting the local governments to pass the resolutions. The Representative Bobart in Colorado, in DC, but she represents the Colorado district, 1st district, I believe it is. She got the guide, or she got our information, got up to speed quickly. And she's the one who really got Congress alerted early. And so 2 letters came out of Congress opposing 30 by 30 that were signed, I think, up to about 70 members of Congress, both Senate and House. And that was really effective to get that going for early on. That happened in April. And then the other thing that happened is we were really, really fortunate that the information got to Governor Rickets in Nebraska early as well. And I went in there to Valentine, Nebraska, which is a little tiny community. And I was going in actually to help the county there work through a conservation easement issue. They were considering one, and Nebraska is very unique. They have a statute that allows the counties to issue a special use permit on whether or not to approve a conservation easement. So I went in there to visit on that right when all this 30 by 30 stuff was really bubbling up. So the county commissioner there, Tanya Storr, suggested we do a public meeting on 30 by 30. So she said, expect 50 to 100 people. We ended up with over 350 people in this very rural community. And then the next day, she had arranged so that we had a meeting with Governor Rickets face to face. And so we're able to sit down with him. He is phenomenal. He is a great businessman. He is a great leader. He still to this day will ask me the toughest questions on 30 by 30. But he got it quickly. He had a statement out opposing it quickly. And then we asked if this is back in March. So we said, look, no other states really even know about this, and asked if he would lead the effort with his colleagues to help them be aware of it. And he did, and sent a letter to President Biden, signed by 15 governors opposing 30 by 30. And that was just phenomenal leadership on his part. And then he's also, he really, he fully has looked at this issue and drilled into it, and he understands it deeply. And it concerned him enough that he has been doing town halls all over Nebraska. He goes into the rural communities himself and does an educational forum on 30 by 30 and lets people ask their questions. And then he signed an executive order opposing 30 by 30 in June. And so that is one governor that is absolutely standing between the people and the federal government on this. And he's really a model.
Fantastic. So you got in Nebraska, 60 counties that have signed the resolution to ban it.
Yeah, I actually think it's over 60 counties. And but yeah, they absolutely have taken this seriously, and it's a large part because of Governor Ricketts' leadership on this. He's made sure that his people are aware of this.
He's also that's the only state so far that's come out against the banning. Has come out to ban the IRS's investigation into our spending $600 of our own money.
Yes,
So,
yes,
yeah,
I saw that. I was very pleased with that.
yeah.
There's another thing that he did years ago. His first mission, his first trade mission to China when he was newly elected as governor. And he got back there and, saw that some of his people were followed, some of their computers have been broken into. And there's some really interesting things. And he just thought this is not the way Nebraska does business. So he started moving all the trade deals out of China. And he honored the ones that they had, of course, in place. But all of his new trade deals, he is getting Nebraska out of China. And I think that, that was years ago that he started doing that. He was definitely ahead of the curve on that as well.
So this is a key factor in what I've been talking about in building freedom pods and so forth, that our city councils, our county commissions, and our state legislatures have more power than they understand that they do. And the federal government can come down with all these dictates all they want, but if the states and the local and the mayors and the city councils and so forth stand up and say no, they can stop this stuff. And this is a vital piece of information that we have got to drive, because I have so many people who say, well, what can we do when all those federal agents come down here and they've got all that power behind them and so forth, and we're just a little community. You can say no. You've been proving that over and over again for years.
Yes.
And that is, we have to understand that that's the way this country was designed. And so many of these things, the Constitution has 17 enumerated powers for the federal government, and anything they do outside of that is illegal. And it's up to the states to decide on that. But so many of them, just as you learned with coordination, they all thought it meant cooperate. And it doesn't. It means you got the power on the local level to fight back. And so this is a vital key to what I'm trying to get people to understand, and what they need to do in their own community.
Absolutely. And, we're also on the 30 by 30 issue specifically, there definitely is a lot that the counties can do on this, but it's also a private property rights issue. And when they're talking about taking 30% of our land, a large portion of that is going to be private land. And you have to kind of read the CAP report, but what they say is 2/3 of the development on the converting natural areas to development is happening on private land, but only 1% is protected. That's a big concern of theirs. So there is a huge target on private landowners. They really want that land. The other thing is that they know that it's the private landowner that takes very good care of his land. So that means that's where all the species are that they're trying to protect. So that's why they want to control the private lands as well. Their tool to do this is the conservation easement in perpetuity and these conservation programs. And so they have really been courting the major agriculture organizations to, not oppose them on 30 by 30 and get behind it. Why? Because the only way they can achieve 30 by 30 is if landowners voluntarily agree to these programs. And that is so key for people to understand, which may mean that an individual is going to have to walk away from taking conservation dollars on their operation. But there's so many reasons why that really should become a part of the thought process. And I'm going to get into the weeds a little bit more on this, but I'm going to give you an example. They don't need to pass any laws to get control of our land if we voluntarily sign up for these conservation programs, because there's already laws in place that give them the authority to step in and start putting controls in place. And I'll give you an example. So when an endangered species is listed and the government designates critical habitat does not apply to private land unless there is any kind of a federal program or funding or approval necessary on the property. So if you have a conservation reserve program, you're taking CRP money, you're in EQIP, you're in any of these other conservation programs where there's federal funding attached, now critical habitat applies. And so, and what we're seeing, and you've probably been watching this too, but we've been watching very carefully the listing of species that are occurring right now under the Biden administration. And we're seeing a focus on getting large ecosystem range-wide species listed, like increasing the acreage for spotted owl, the wolf, the lesser prairie chicken in Texas, New Mexico, Colorado, Kansas, Oklahoma, big species listings that take up a big swath of land. And all of those private landowners in there that have the conservation programs, they now become vulnerable to the critical habitat designation. And one of the other things I'd like to say about this is that, you know, these conservation programs have been useful in the past. I think there's been some benefit to them, and some landowners have definitely benefited from them. But and they haven't seen the restrictions come in that we're talking about. And what I want to remind people is, you may have been comfortable going into a CRP program in the Trump administration, where he was less regulation, pro-productivity. And so you didn't have to worry so much about the regulatory hammer. We're now in the Biden administration, who has made it very clear that they want to permanently protect 30% of our land. Now's the time, if you have been signing up for these programs in the past, now's the time to really be discerning about that, and as you consider that.
One of the incredible things about the conservation easements is these land trusts sell them to the property owners, particularly farmers, they just want to farm. They just want to make sure their land stays a farm, and they sell them on this idea that you sign this conservation easement in perpetuity forever, then your land will always be a farm. And the real fallacy of that argument is, a developer can't come in and just take your land and start to develop it without the county or city government that's using its power of eminent domain to do it. So it's really the government that's taking the land that they say they're trying to protect it from. You know?
Yeah.
So,
yeah, the conservation easement is, yeah, you're exactly right. It can be condemned, number one. A conservation easement can be condemned, which people don't realize. There's so many things about the easement that landowners don't understand when they sign up for them, because you have to understand, first off, a land trust does not have to give full disclosure like a realtor. So the land trust just comes in and sells the good side, and they don't tell the landowner about all the downsides. And one of the key things to understand about a conservation easement is what you are doing is they say you're selling your development rights, so it'll never be developed. You can continue it in agriculture at the level that you're currently doing. First problem with that, I don't know any operations in agriculture that can survive if they keep doing things the way that they do it. Number one, the nature is always changing. It's always been that way. So you have to adapt to that if you're in agriculture. Technology is always improving. And so, for instance, I was in Montana, and there was a bunch of land that was being farmed along the Yellowstone River up there. And my host up there was showing me that area on the river used to all be flood irrigated, and that's how they farmed everything and watered everything. He said, well, 10 years ago, they all put in the sprinkler systems, the pivots. And we talked about that, because if that area had been in the conservation easement, they wouldn't have been able to put in those pivots. They wouldn't have been able to make better use of the water. So those kind of things, that's what happens under the conservation easement. The agriculture activity is frozen. So eventually, if you're in agriculture, you're going to go out of business if you have a conservation easement on. The second thing is that what you've done is you've sold the conservation purpose or the development rights. Now that conservation purpose now is the controlling element of the private property. That controls everything. Your use is secondary. The conservation purpose now is what is primary. So if that conservation purpose is to protect a species, and what you're doing in agriculture conflicts with that, and it's all judgmental, it's going to be some bureaucrat who makes that determination, then your property is now in jeopardy. And so what we say, people will say, but it's a private property right to sign up for a conservation easement. What I say is, it's your private property before you sign that conservation easement. Once you sign that conservation easement, it's no longer private property, because you have sold the fundamental element of private property, which is control. You no longer control that property.
The other part of that too is that the land trusts that you're signing it with they're buying and selling and trading these things like a commodity with each other. You never know which land trust is going to be your controller. And, but you have destroyed your property value. You can't sell it, and because nobody's going to buy it with that on there, and you're just stuck. I actually saw a document on conservation easements from Ohio that said this is in perpetuity to the United States or its successors. The country can disappear, but it's kind of
oh my. Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah.
So
wow.
All right. Just one more thing, Margaret. Sure. Now, we've talked about what's happening in Nebraska and some other things you're having. Any other details you want to give on some other states, other places where you're getting some real success, or even is there a place where you're getting some major opposition?
New Mexico right now is they're really kind of in the target zone for 30 by 30 because the New Mexico governor did the exact opposite of what Governor Rickets did. And she signed an executive order that, of course, is 100% fully trying to implement 30 by 30 in New Mexico. But she went further. She included setting aside the 30%, but then she added to that an additional 20% for a climate stabilization area. So she's up to 50% in her executive order. And, we have so many good people in New Mexico, really good fighters that have won a lot of battles. They've fought these kind of battles before and they've won them. Chavez County is absolutely a leader in that state. And I think now in the state, we're up to 9 counties out of 33 in New Mexico that have passed a resolution opposing 30 by 30. But they are getting organized. And they are definitely getting educated on 30 by 30 and putting up some walls. So, but that's part of what we need to watch for. And one of the reasons why I think it's so important that local governments, that the people jump on this now and get the opposition rolling in your community, because what you want to prevent is you want to prevent the environmentalists courting your governor to do something like the New Mexico governor did. You want to make it politically very difficult for them to take that kind of a position. And that's the other reason why these opposition resolutions are really important, because they send that signal. But that's one of your biggest protections. You want the state on your side. You don't want the state fighting you on this or joining in the caper.
No. All right, perfect. You've done a wonderful job. And this is right up the alley of what I've been trying to get people to understand, what's happening right there in your local community. You can win. And the number one thing that we have got to keep in our minds, we cannot start looking down in defeat and say, well, we've lost the republic. The minute we do that, we have. So we have got to take a stand, and it does work. We can do that. And say again, your website, American Stewards of Liberty, and how they can get this material from you.
So the website is americanstewards.us, and there's a little box on the home page on 30 by 30. Click that, and that'll get you to the guide to download. It'll get you a lot of the current information on 30 by 30. And also, the other thing I would suggest is we are producing the Liberty Matters news service. And that's a bi-weekly publication. And that's really where we do a lot of our updates on what's going on 30 by 30. So that's a free, you can sign up for it. We don't paper your inbox too much with that. We go out bi-weekly, and then, we will do things like send you out an event schedule of where we're going to be in the area. And, that's another thing to think about is we will come to your area and we will visit with your people. We will do a presentation on 30 by 30 and answer your questions and help get you educated. We're happy to come to you to travel. We think this is so important that people really understand this. And we have yet to have one in the East yet. So we've been doing a lot in the West, but in the Midwest, but we have yet to do one in the East. But we would definitely come to your community.
And they can contact you on your website to ask you to come out.
Yeah, asl@americanstewards.us is the email address. So,
say that again.
But it's asl@americanstewards.us.
Okay, excellent. Margaret, thank you. And I'm looking forward to working with you as closely as we can on these things. And maybe we can get you some warriors as well to get involved and get it moving. So
yes, thanks so much, Tom. Appreciate it. Good to see you again too.
you too. You too. All right. Thank you. Hi, this is Tom DeWeese, and I want to encourage you to take a look at the tools that the American Policy Center is creating right now to help fight back in your local community. I call it building a freedom pod. And what I mean by that is the basic organization that you need to do in order to effectively fight back. We keep getting caught flat-footed. The other side keeps bringing up all kinds of policies and crazy radical ideas and things. And a lot of us really get caught saying, what are they doing? What are we going to do about this? And we don't have the permanent infrastructure organized in order to fight back. We have to start from scratch almost every single time. You know what? The other side has a permanent infrastructure. They're ready at all times. They know what's coming and they're ready to stand up to it, up for it and move on. We keep scratching our heads saying, where did this one come from? The idea of building a freedom pod in your community is focused just on your community. Don't worry about what happens in the next community. Your city council, your county commission, your board of education. These are the places where the fights need to be fought right there. And we have put together a way to build a team, to put an offensive together. If you can fight on the local level, that'll move up not only to the other communities, but move up to your state legislature eventually. And we've actually got materials for working in the state legislatures, and I'll share that with you in a second. But we also will begin to stand up to the federal government and stymie their attempts to overtake us. Our local governments and our state legislatures, really, a lot of them don't understand the power that they have, and we need to help enforce that and change things. We got to change the debate. We've got to move forward with our principles and be ready to fight for those. So we've created the Local Activist Handbook that you will find on our website at americanpolicy.org. Along with this handbook, we've put together a bunch of other tools to go with it. The handbook covers many things. One of the main things it talks about is how to build your own local organization, a freedom pod, and all the steps it takes to do that. They're very basic things. I've really designed this particularly for those new activists who really don't know how to get started. This will teach you how to research as the main thing to start with. You got to know who your enemy is. You got to know what they're up to, and doing the research will begin to help you set the plan. Then you have people who are the ones who go in and speak in front of those city council meetings or wherever you're working. And how do you get other activists, victims of these programs, get them involved in your programs, in your effort? On and on like this. We've got that. We've even got for your state legislature, we've got 5 sample bills and a tactic, even if your legislators are in a minority in their state legislature, we've got a plan of how they can change that and have a big effect. As I said, we've got 5 sample bills in the handbook that we can start with and how to use those. We've got other tools. How about on election, during the election campaign, the candidates up there wanting to shake your hand and get your vote. And you ask them, hey, do you believe in property rights? And he says, well, yeah, sure, of course I do. Well, we've got to document a candidate's pledge for him to sign, saying, hey, I want to see it in writing, sir, and get him to sign that. We've also got a resolution you can bring before your city council, and you ask them, hey, as you're bringing these planners into our communities, I'd like to know what guarantees I have that you'll protect my property rights. And I'm telling you from experience, they'll tell you all the time, of course I will. Hey, I'm a property owner too. You say, great, I'd like to have it in writing, please. These are things we need to do to change the debate, to turn it around on them. One of the other tools we have is a grading system for those elected officials. You take the bills and the policies that they've passed and you mark them 1 to 10. You take their votes on them 1 to 10. Where do they stand on all that? And then you can start to grade them. And you know what the fun part of that is? When they start to deny what you've said, they have now opened it to a public debate and you can now respond. Well, councilman, you voted for this and this is what it does and so forth. These are tools to begin to stand up and fight back and begin to take back our liberties. So this is what we've created, how to build a freedom pod, our local activist handbook. On our website, after you get this handbook, you will be given information to get into our toolkit for new information that comes up all the time. Anything new, any new tactics, some successes that other groups are doing and so forth, we'll share that. So it's always up to date. We have a list that's growing now of other organizations in other states and other communities. And you know, if you don't know how to get started, you might be able to find a group that's already there that you can join. That's also on the in the toolkit, and so many of the other tools that we have. So the other thing that we're now offering is part of this is a monthly conference call where you can begin to ask questions. How do I do this? How do I do that? I and others will join in and give you some of the answers for it. We need to build freedom pods across this nation and take back our liberty. And that is what this whole program is all about. Please go to americanpolicy.org and start to read about it and get started with it. Thank you.